From billionaire supply chain entrepreneur Li Fung, a blunt assessment of a once mighty Asian economy.
Japan has become almost irrelevant. You don't hear about Japan anymore. It's amazing. In the 80s, they were conquering the world. They were buying the Rockefeller Center. Okay, and now they've turned inwards.
Once considered the powerhouse of Asia, Japan is almost irrelevant, he says. Its growth now non-existent. Although its economy is far smaller, China is now the biggest hope.
As far as we're concerned, China represents now the third market. Okay, the United States, EU, and now China as the third big market. And that's really where we focus our attention on. We see that as a necessary and a welcome, a diversification away from the US and the European market. And we're doing a lot to change our business around to suit that.
With a fortune made tapping into the globalization of manufacturing, Fung has made it his business to anticipate changes in world trade and shifting markets. Fung is the executive deputy chairman of Li Fung, the Hong Kong-based sourcing and logistics giant, labelled by Forbes magazine as the go-to company for globalization. Speaking to an audience at NUS Business School, he said that while the world faces tough times, there are opportunities, led by the emergence of China as a consumer market in its own right.
China now is still relatively small, right? About half the size of the EU and smaller than the 16 trillion US economy by far. But I think it's coming, and it's coming, and it's going to come quickly. That's the impact of China. Okay, don't forget, it's always size times your speed or acceleration. Look at Japan, huge GDP, but not growing.
The emergence of the China market, he says, is a game changer, with a major impact on the world, on Asia in particular, and on the direction of Li Fung's business.
The sizzle, the growth is all in China. So the idea is to combine the Japanese and the Chinese markets and look at it as one market. And saying that this is now a huge market. It has both the bulk and eventually China will provide the bulk as well, but the growth is there.
Fung, who is a member of the Management Advisory Board at NUS Business School, says China appears to be moving in 30-year cycles. In the first cycle, from 1949 until the late 1970s, China turned inwards, cutting itself off from the world, which got by without giving China any consideration. Then, in 1979, a series of reforms opened China up, adding 25% to the global labour force. Over the next 3 decades, this second cycle transformed China into what became known as the factory of the world. In 2009, another dramatic shift began, signalled by a series of wage hikes in the country's factories. Fung says this third cycle marks the start of a conscious policy by the Chinese government to grow a second engine of growth, the domestic consumer market. Looking forward, he says this cycle will see the Chinese consumer market overtaking that of the US.
It's almost like people switching on the switch. It was a complete volte-face of what they used to do. How are they doing it? Very simply, in the 12th five-year plan, if you read their five-year plan, they're talking about a 13.5% increase in minimum wages across the board. That means at the end of the five-year plan, China's wages are going up 82%. Now, that is a huge, huge change, and it's policy-driven. It's not market-driven, it's policy-driven. China wants to create now a consuming middle class that will be the second engine for growth.
Fung says that switch will lead to some major changes, inside and outside China, changes that many people are not considering, but for which businesses and consumers need to be ready.
One of the side effects of the 30 years between 1979 and 2009 is that China actually depressed world prices in consumer goods. China put a cap on world prices because there's so much production coming out of China. That era is over. Okay, what you're going to see is a rise now in consumer goods costs, at least from the wage side. Okay, and that's something that people haven't come to grips with yet. The idea of inflation coming back into the consumer sector in America and in Europe.
As China's consumer market develops, Fung says he expects more and more Chinese multinationals to emerge, driven initially by China's shortage of raw materials, but eventually through natural growth of a maturing Chinese economy.
Just like the American multinationals first built their strength on their home market, the same thing will happen in China. The hires of this world, all the technology companies, they'll all consolidate by building on their market power in China. Then they'll go outside. And I think that would be normal.
He adds that the changes that are taking place in China are also taking place elsewhere in the world. Developing countries that once used to be just a platform for manufacturing and export are now becoming markets in their own right.
So everything is now becoming more globalized, both ways. You manufacture globally, you sell globally. And you must have the organization to be able to do that. It can't be unidimensional. Now the world is made up of really outsourced relationships. See, the idea of a vertically integrated, hardwired industrial company is almost a thing of the past. Very few companies can claim that every part of my production is better done in this location, rather than a global in search of the best place to do each part of your production and pull it all together again with supply chains.
Fung says this fluid business climate requires leaders who cannot just adapt to change when or after it happens, but have the vision to actually see it coming. At Li Fung, he says, the company has institutionalized the process of reinvention, taking a zero-base approach every 3 years. Change is inevitable, and the rate of change is accelerating. So companies must be agile and ready to change, even to cannibalize and to reinvent themselves. The key lesson, he says, is that companies should not shy away from doing something new because it's unfamiliar. Successful innovation, Fung says, comes in many forms.
The biggest innovation may not be innovation in product or innovation in design, but innovation in business model.
For NUS Business School, I'm Joe Haverley.